welcome back to the Azure Terraformer. An old colleague of mine reached out and asked for me to sit down with his dev team and talk about their automation, their cloud adoption journey, just to pick my brain. And I signed up. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. It's actually going to be a recording of this meeting that my friend John Reed graciously allowed me to post to you all to share some of the conversation that we had about their story, their journey, and my thoughts and and a little bit of Q&A that they had for me as we kind of unwound their environment and what kind of problems that they were facing. John gives a little bit of an overview about what they're trying to accomplish. I give a little bit of introduction of myself, and then we're off to the races. Ironically enough, for a Terraform talk, we spend a lot of time talking about Azure functions, which is totally fine. I think it's a really good conversation, and really shows that, Terraform, while it is like a key aspect of anybody's cloud operational story, cloud migration story, you really need to understand the cloud platform that you're targeting in order to be effective using Terraform. So today we spend a lot of time talking about the fundamentals of Azure functions, and we do spend a little bit of time talking about Terraform and Azure DevOps ecosystem as well. I hope you enjoy this. It's very much off the cuff. Without further ado, let's get started.
We have scheduled an hour, but I don't anticipate taking an hour at a time. But of course, you can do an intro on yourself as well. I'm sure the guys want to know who you are, what you're all about, your background, and so on. So from our perspective, this is kind of the SoloProtect development team that you see in front of you. Bar one is the Scrum Master. He's got some other stuff to attend to, and because it's a technical kind of forum, I thought, he's not really interested, so he's doing something more interesting in his eyes. I came to SoloProtect just over a year ago, Mark, and they're a small company. We're American owned, that won't surprise you, by a family in Texas. They have us as well as another tech company based in Denver, I believe. So they've got, this family have got a background and history of having tech companies. I believe we're the only one in their portfolio that's based in the UK. And we're in loan worker protection, and our market is in UK, US, as well as Europe. So we've got a product portfolio of devices, different types of devices, as well as a mobile app. And then to complement that, we have a web application that our customers use. It's a portal where they can go on there, and they've got metrics, they've got analysis, they can do some configurations, they manage their users, etc. So it's a pretty good product portfolio. And when I say loan worker protection, so there are many use cases out there across multiple industries, from construction, council, retail, and so on. So Amazon, warehouses, DPD, or John Lewis retail. In the US, we've got academic institutions where they've got loan workers, and they need some loan worker protection. So we equip them with one of our devices or the mobile app. Mobile app seems to be more prevalent in the UK, particularly in Europe as well, not so much in the US. And so this device is very simple in its nature, really, but the technology that drives it, you can imagine, is complex. So use cases, you're in retail, you're a shop owner, you see your life might be under threat for whatever reason, and these buttons are equipped with an emergency button press. That engages sort of one-way, or it can do two-way communication with our alarm receiving center in the UK. That's a 24/7 operation. And then through a series of conversations or events, so we capture a lot of events from these devices, our alarm receiving center can determine whether that incident or that individual is in need of an emergency. So we have a license to dispatch emergency services, ambulance, police, and so on. So that's very high level. There's lots of use cases associated with our solutions.
Got it.
And then, like I say, you've got the web portal that's currently in kind of an ASP.NET MVC, little bits of React, .NET Core. The UK and EU is largely on-premise with a SQL Server database supporting all of our solution. And then you have our US instance, which is all sat in the Azure space. Our devices historically were built in Java, but more recently moved over to Kotlin. So our technology landscape is quite mixed, quite varied. You could argue, to some extent, it's pretty fragmented. So since I arrived just over a year ago, what we've been embarking upon is more of a kind of tech transition and a modernization. So we want to take the web platform, kind of decompose it because it's a monolith, and we want to start moving that into a more towards API-led architecture, service-based architecture, sat on Azure Functions, Event Grid, Azure Services.
Gotcha.
So piece by piece, we'll decompose that and start building more APIs. So a large chunk of the modernization is already underway, if not part of our technical roadmap. That also includes moving SQL into Azure SQL. And so across our regions, we can be more Azure-led, and we can be more consistent with how we build software, what we build it on, etc.
Gotcha.
And so, more recently, when we've been doing things like deployment through Azure DevOps, CI/CD, the pipelines, we've touched upon Bicep, but then we've moved into more of the Terraform territory. So I'll pause there so you can see it's quite a small development team. We have had some personnel changes in the team as well. So you'll find Thomas, who's been with us since December. Rachel's a software tester, she's been with us about 2 months. Andrew Holman is a central database developer, been with us for 3 months. But then you'll find the other guys like Abilash, who's been just over a year, and then Karim, Anthony, Tony, Arthur, they've been with the company for 4 years, 4 years. It's a mixed bag, so that's where we're at. So I'll pause there, and you can do an intro on your good self, and then we'll kick off into the Terraform piece. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. My name's Mark Tinderholt. I've been a consultant for probably close to 20 years before I joined Microsoft. Started software dev in 1999, doing VB6, Com Plus, Java. Then nobody cheers at John except you, man. Then quickly hopped on the C# bandwagon, and was C# developer, architect, played many roles. Led small teams, led large teams, just doing implementation work, building web apps, building smart client apps, building service-based architecture, microservice architecture, and as my career progressed, I found that my teams needed a lot more coaching and help in that release process and the automation space, especially as we've started moving into cloud. And so my philosophy has always been, to be an architect, you have to be hands-on, right? Like you can't just work from an ivory tower and just not have a deep understanding of what the development team is doing on a day-to-day basis. So I always stayed very close, to the wire in terms of staying technical, programming, even to the point where my colleagues that were at similar career spots kind of laughed at me, right? Like, Mark, I haven't coded in 2 years. What are you doing, man? And I'm like, man, is there something wrong with me? Like, should I be doing this? I don't know. And, I just kept doing it. It felt right. And, early on in my career, I had a lead architect who clearly had no clue, like, what I did on a day-to-day basis. And so I've always kind of felt like that, no matter what level you are, if you're the technical lead, if you're leading a technical team, you need to lead from the front, and you need to be able to drop in and solve the hardest problems. So that's just been my approach, and it's served me well. And just recently, thanks be to COVID, Microsoft and a lot of the other big tech companies opened up and started hiring, work from home remote folks. I live in Ohio, and I seized the opportunity, and I landed an engineering job at Microsoft. So I'm not a consultant. I'm not a salesperson. I literally work on the Azure core team, which is responsible for compute, networking, and storage. That's kind of the underlayer of Azure core. But I have all this. So like I don't even really do Terraform. Isn't really part of my day job. I just have accumulated a lot of interest and a lot of knowledge and a lot of passion in the Terraform and automation space. And this January I was just like, I should get some of this stuff out of my head and put it on the internet. And maybe some people will listen to me. That's when I started the YouTube channel, and I don't know if you guys have seen that, but basically I'm on YouTube I'm a niche of a niche, right? I'm not expecting to ever be like the Beast or whatever, what that guy's name is, or somebody like that. I know my limits are already pretty low because I'm a niche of a niche, but I try and help people leverage Azure, and leverage Terraform and automate things on Azure, and use my diverse background, building systems, and applying automation to that. So that's who I am, and nice to meet you guys. And John and I crossed paths, in a previous gig, and he reached out and was like, "Hey, I see you're doing a lot of stuff with Terraform. We're moving in this space. Maybe we could pick your brain, throw some spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks." And so I'm here today just for you guys, lay it on me, let me know what you guys want me to look at. And all I can do is give honest feedback and tell you, like, if there's something I don't know, I don't know. So that's it. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that, Mark. Excellent. And that's what we're hoping to get out of today's call. For a lot of the guys here as well, we've got such a wide variety of expertise in this team, from embedded engineering to mobile app, database testing, and so on. So they've heard the term and the instance Terraform in some of the daily chats that we've had and so on, because it's largely been Tom, possibly Karim, and Anthony, known as Tony, that have been largely involved in the Bicep and then Terraform. So I suspect they'll be driving most of this conversation, but it's good for the other guys, certainly myself as well, Mark, in truth, to be more aware of what we've done, what we plan to do. And for me, it's more around if you can identify any potential gaps or opportunities for us or gotchas that we could take away, that would be valuable.
Sure.
So, that'd be great. So, Tom, I don't know whether you want to start leading on this or Tony.
Yeah.
Just a brief mark on what we've got with Terraform, what we have, and how we got there.
I've barely started. I can tell you how bad Bicep is.
Bicep's not terrible, but yeah, just a little run up of where we started off at. So we were around the time we started looking at infrastructure as code in general. It was the first time the developer CLI had come into preview, and so we thought, okay, maybe we should have a go of this. Does it actually make our dev workflows much easier? And it was nice for a few things, but the big selling point for Bicep seemed to be that the latest Azure ARM templates or the API version, they're available in Bicep and not in Terraform, and that's your selling point, and the fact that you don't have to do state management. Really, and I feel like this was a bit of someone tried to sell that to me, and I was like, that sounds pretty good. And then I used Terraform, and I was like, actually, you know what? Yeah, you have to do state management, but the syntax and the CLI is much nicer, a much better experience in general. So we're going to go with that. We also looked at Pulumi just to see what it would be like if we had, using an SDK inside of a programming language rather than a CLI tool. But again, I think for Terraform, the thing we saw was the support and the community around it. Bicep is years behind. Terraform there's everything you need to know everywhere. To a degree, you still need the domain expertise. I'll share my screen in a minute, but the general idea that we have is we started in Bicep, we decided to move to Terraform. The layout is at the moment, a centralized repository for just infrastructure code. So at the moment that contains Bicep and Terraform, but we're migrating the old stuff that we did in Bicep to Terraform when we get time. So centralized repo, and we deploy all of that infrastructure out of that repository. Now at the moment, this is just using the CLI, but we're hoping to move it into DevOps pipelines very soon. We just don't have the service principals set up, and we were doing a big migration or we were adding new subscriptions to our Azure landscape to do better cost management and better segregation of permissions. And so we sort of didn't have the ability to set up all the principles we wanted at the beginning. But we're in a much better position now. So we're ready to start moving it into CI/CD and stop using the CLI. Now, the other thing I want to mention is when we did Bicep the way we managed it was through variable files, and when we came to Terraform, we did the same thing at the beginning, but we actually moved over to TerraGrunt very recently because we wanted the ability to lay out our environments exactly as we wanted without having to repeat our .tf files and all the other things. So what we actually have now is a few projects, Terraform projects with TerraGrunt on the side, or I guess on top, to manage so we have the Terraform modules as the templates, and the TerraGrunt as the real things that are up there. Our state is stored inside a storage account in each region at the moment, so not a centralized storage account, but instead a infrastructure state storage account in its own resource group, which hopefully will mean it will never be messed with by anyone. We can add security on that, I know, but for the time being, it's just separated enough that it should never get deleted. And that's about where we're at. So we don't have the things that we definitely don't have right now are CI/CD pipelines for deploying the infrastructure, a clear way to go from infrastructure to deploying the code on top of it. So no links between the infra and the code. They're two very separate processes almost. The code relies on the infrastructure to be there, but there's no triggers based on the code existing, so it deploys the infrastructure, or the infrastructure exists, so it allows you to deploy the code. And the last thing was, what was it? I just said it just then. Said CI/CD pipelines, and we don't use any cloud tools on top of it. So the two I'm aware of, there's like Terraform Cloud. We don't use anything like that. Or the other one was called like Star something or other. But something to actually manage our CI/CD.
I think it's like maybe Spacelift. Is that what it's called?
Spacelift.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was using the Spacelift blog to work out a lot of the stuff because they have a great blog on Terraform and a lot of other CI/CD tools.
Yeah.
So we don't at the moment have Spacelift or Terraform Cloud. And that's one of the things we'll be wanting to ask you about, whether I'm sure it is worth it to some degree to have one of these services, and we don't deploy enough infrastructure that we could probably test out Terraform Cloud or something.
Yeah.
to give it a go. And yeah, that's basically it. If you want to see the TF files, the actual structure of the repository, that's fine. But that explanation is more or less what we've got.
Yeah. No, that's good. A couple of things, right? I'm just gonna tackle TerraGrunt right away. I've used TerraGrunt before.
Yeah.
I can't say that I'm a huge fan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is gonna come off very emotional, right? But and maybe things have changed, right?
Yeah.
But for me, one of the reasons why I avoid CDK and stuff like that is because I try and keep things simple, like keep things as simple as possible, and not inject like additional like modifiers to like that could culprit. And I say this in a somewhat ironic way because my YouTube channel is a niche of a niche, but like when you're managing an organization that is doing cloud automation, right? It's very difficult to upskill people and onboard people because there's a gazillion tools and crap you have to learn, right?
Yeah.
And so keeping things simple is a great way to number one, keep your team sane, right? Number two, make it faster for people to cross-train, upskill, onboard, whatever. And I felt like with TerraGrunt, yes, it seems like it's like the power tools of Terraform.
Yes.
But there's a lot of like TerraGrunt specific knowledge that you need in order to become productive with in the TerraGrunt ecosystem. That's a like not only is that like different ways of doing things, but it's also like how HCL interplays with their little Python framework and their little custom CLI tools and things like that, which just made me kind of like the trade-off is it's more of an organizational one. It's like, can my organization tolerate yet another thing that's an even finer grain niche within a niche if we're just trying to get some shit done,
So to be honest, the experience we had wasn't too bad. We're not using it for copious amounts of file generation. As soon as I saw that, I was like, there's no way. I'm not generating provider files across all my different projects to do this. It's not happening. What we do use it for, and the thing that is mainly helped with, is variable management across environments, because you can define for example, our Azure infrastructure is kind of split out. So at the moment, we don't have a proper dev environment, but it's on its way. We have a QA environment, production UK, US, and EU. And what TerraGrunt helped us do is organize the levels of production UK.
You've gone quiet, Tom.
You've dropped for us, Tom.
Give me a minute. Can you still hear me? There we go.
Yes,
There we go.
that's better. Repeat that.
So what TerraGrunt helped us sort of achieve was, we've got these different environments with different dependencies, and some things might exist in other environments but not in others. We may have something that's shared across all regions, and so TerraGrunt, it is hefty and it's hard. You are absolutely right. It's hard to onboard, but the things that it definitely helped with were variable management and the state control, because otherwise you had to because we're not using Terraform Cloud or any cloud tool, the only way to manage your state was manually add lots and lots of Terraform files saying like, this is the state for this one and this is the state for that one. We've not overdone it with it. Let's just say that what we've used it for is dependency management. So taking, for example, we use Azure App Configuration to manage the configuration of our apps, but that's shared amongst quite a few apps. And we need to make sure that's deployed, but not redeployed, or something else will destroy it by accident. So it has its own state file. It's managed on its own. And obviously, at the moment, we can't guarantee that all our apps use managed identity. So we need to use the connection string for the app config. This is a shared dependency across multiple apps, and TerraGrunt makes managing that dependency. So, you depend on this app config, so we'll pull the connection string down from the state file, something like that. So we've not overdone it with file generation, that's what I'll say, but variable management and state management and a little bit of dependency management. So we've kept it very light on HCL files.
So Mark, can you see any opportunities of improvement for us there, or any gotchas in those use cases of why we're using Terraform?
Yeah, and I guess I was going to ask about blast radius, right? Because you did mention, because I think thinking about blast radius, it's one of the biggest, rocks that people trip over when they do Terraform. They're just like, wow, Terraform, it's awesome. Just going to like dump everything into one big folder, right? And then like like you run Terraform apply and it's like 3 hours later, it's like, and then something breaks and it's like, oh, Jesus, like now I have to go put my hands in this toxic waste pool. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys are doing some things with blast radius, even though it might be in a central repo. You've got different root modules that deploy different layers of your infrastructure. Yes.
We do. At the moment, we don't have a lot of things in there yet, necessarily, but the idea is we're doing it by life cycle at the minute. And I mean life cycle in not this API depends on this API, depends on that API. So there are one life cycle, but an API and its database. And the database is obviously very secluded on its own. It has we keep that very separate. Good. It's a dependency, not in the blast radius of your Terraform destroy. Yeah. Obviously for function app storage accounts, we're not too bothered, because they don't really store any persistent data in there. At least we don't use it for that. So we know that for data, we want to have root modules separately, so where the blast radius is tiny, and we tend to segregate our apps. So as in app config, because we know that is something we don't want to destroy by accident in one thing and break something else. It's got its own state file, which is stored in a storage account as, we've got a Terraform state container, and then each root module has a folder on its own and the Terraform state file in there. We also did stuff interacting with Azure AD because we use two providers. We use Azure RM for our ARM stuff, but we also have to make use of Azure B2C for things like single sign-on. So we've got app registrations being built and stuff like that. But even those are segregated to this app needs this app registration to have this permission with a Microsoft Graph. That is in the same blast radius because it belongs there. But we with the Bicep we ended up doing very much very large blast radius stuff. And we've worked pretty hard to make sure that essentially, apart from data or things important data, not like just logs or whatever, even though you might want to keep them, but anything data related on its own, and everything else is by the application lifecycle, which pretty much lives in one resource group almost. So that the teardown is actually really simple.
So
and that's
I guess what I would say is I hear you, like the main reasons for TerraGrunt I hear are variable input, like the value management, right? What the values are, and then state control. And for me, I like TFRs. I don't know if you guys watch my channel, but I like TFRs. I almost always use pipelines, but I do want to point out, I think it is very important that local devs can run Terraform, plan, and apply. So I just, in a dev, in a not underprivileged environment, right? So I think that's something that you should strive as, to have as part of your operating model. But I guess the approach that I take with variable management kind of feeds into state control. I organize, like you mentioned, different layers of I'll call it shared infrastructure, right? That, and of course, at Microsoft this would not be like enterprise infrastructure, but my team builds an internal service at Microsoft, and we have some shared infrastructure which provides basic things like vWAN, site-to-site VPN, stuff like that our operators need to use to get into the system. And then that's kind of like you mentioned, like the database. That's like I'm going to use Minecraft terms. That's like bedrock, right? It's like it's like the bottom layer. You can't go below that. If there's a hole in that thing, you're going to be falling for infinity, right? It's not good. So like the network is usually a good base layer. And then database, persistent storage like that is like probably one level up from that, but because usually those are attached to your network. But the way I approach that, I'll give every blast radius, every service or an application name, right? So if it's a stamp of infrastructure that I want to carve a boundary around, I'll give it what I call an application name. And then I'll give it an environment name so that I can be like, okay, I'm going to have fully isolated, network in dev and prod. And so I might call it, central network. That'll be the application name. And then the environment will be dev and there'll be one for prod. So it'll be central network dev, central network prod, and that's my base layer. And then when I layer stuff on top of that, all I got to do is create a new application name. Let's say central database dev, central database prod, application name, environment name, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And using this kind of these like key naming pattern, like when I draw a dependency from the database onto the central network, right? I key off of, okay, well, what network do I want to connect to? It's the central network. And what environment is it in? Dev. And so at that point, I just use data sources to connect the different layers of sediment to the downstream, bedrock, right? And it's like kind of on top of that. And the TF-vars file ends up being the place where I have those pointers that say, okay, where's your network? It's in central dev, and that points down and points out. And when I get up to the Azure function is going to be pointing down to the central dev, the central network dev, and the central database dev, right? As an example. These are all made up crap names, but like you get the idea. It's like if your system is called Whoop, then it would be like Whoop dev, Whoop prod, right? Something like that. So I guess I haven't seen any challenges related to variable management that I would need to go introduce a new tool to do that. And then state control, this pattern makes it very easy to do state control as well, because now you like the whole purpose of having the application name and the environment name concatenate together is to produce a unique string that represents that blast radius of infrastructure. And that's where the state file needs a one-to-one mapping, right? So
it's not too dissimilar for us. I didn't actually talk about our naming at the minute because we have a lot of some on-prem stuff which we don't talk about, and we have a lot of what I'll say is legacy Azure stuff which was built without any infrastructure as code. So we have no idea what's there really. It's not tied down. And the costs are hard to track and stuff like that.
ClickOps.
So since I joined, we've been on the no more of this. We're tying everything down as much as we physically can. Dev resources, okay.
Have you removed contributor access for all users to your subs?
Not yet.
That's when the cherry will pop, man. That's when the cherry will pop. Let me tell you.
We have, at the moment, we don't have the liberty. We're working on looking at PIM and getting PIM set up. At the moment, we've only just got everything set into management groups. But the person who was going to lead the management groups at first left. So it's kind of on us to, for the time being, take responsibility for all of this. So at the moment, me and Tony are marked as owners, and everyone else is contributor at the moment based on our provisioning of that. Not great for the time, but it's the best we can do with the number of people we have and no dedicated
Cloud.
like cloud infrastructure IT guy who can keep us in check.
Only one sub?
No. We have at the moment we have 2 where most of our resources are deployed, and then we added 4 new ones recently for test, production UK, EU, and US. So we segregate our subs by region as well.
Those sound like environment names to me, man. Right there.
Oh, boom. Yeah. So the main thing is that, for example, we had a funny thing with function apps in central US. We couldn't create an app service plan for central US on a consumption plan, so we had to use West US, and so the variables changed around. And the thing we were finding was that, at least from my experience with TF bars, which is not that much, and I just know it was very similar to how we were doing Bicep, is that it created messy directories rather than organized. I guess, do you do different TF files?
You've dropped a little, Tom.
Sorry, yeah. I'm keeping an eye on it.
Can I make a comment on the consumption app service plan?
Yeah.
One little gotcha that I noticed with that is, and you mentioned that, we couldn't create the consumption plan in central US.
Yeah.
This just sounds so weird to me, because I've encountered the same thing. If you have another consumption plan in the same region, I don't know if it's resource group or sub-based, you can't create another consumption plan in that same region. So watch out for consumption plans. Consumption plans are almost like it's like a hack to get you to use this shared pool of stuff. So it's like vapor. Like it's there, but it's not there. It's really there as a mechanism for attachment of your function apps, but it doesn't tie to physical, bare metal, a premium function plan or a traditional app service plan would. So there's some funkiness deploying those.
We're working on unknown. Every budget we have is we have to say the cost of it, and with consumption plans, at least some of it is free to a degree, until you have too many of them, and then now it's not free, and you don't really know necessarily how much it's going to cost you. But when we're kind of looking at, we're not close to using a regular plan, a basic plan, or a standard, or a premium. It's just, is the app important enough that it needs that level, and we've just not hit that point.
Are your functions using HTTP trigger?
Yes, so they should be on premium plans.
Yes, you must be watching my videos.
Let's just say we know. I did a lot of research into cold start and how you could maybe get rid of the cold start, and looking into native AOT to make it less cold starty.
Yes.
But the real answer is just don't use a consumption plan. But it's a cost we're trading off for now while we don't know. We're being a bit reactive with this kind of thing, where if it turns out we need it, then we can bump up the cost and make a case for bumping up the cost.
I would say anything that's you're not waiting on the response. Dump it into a consumption plan, no problem, right? Yeah. But then on the other hand, it's I already have a premium plan. I mean, I could just dump all that stuff in the premium plan, because I'm probably not using that full capacity. So when
we get more function apps up there, which me and Tony will do soon, we may just look at using a shared premium plan. Because of the subscription layout, how we have old subscriptions with everything test, production, UK, EU all in one sub. We're basically moving stuff out as we can. And so there's a bunch of plans that are in that subscription, but we can't use because we're using everything in the new sub. And so it's a bit, once we've got more stuff moved over and we can group a lot more function apps together, absolutely we want to move to a better plan.
Funny story from my past on the Azure functions. In my previous role, I would occasionally get, these SOS kind of 911s from big customers that I had no relationship with at all. They were just some customer at our company.
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, it's cloud related, Azure related, AWS related, whatever, call mark, like, and so like, I was brought in. This I think it was a UK company. I think they're a shoe company or something in the UK, like an equivalent to like Nike or something. I don't know. And their e-commerce site was just like shutting down randomly during the day, and their CTO was like freaking out, as you can imagine. And I got called onto a call with the CTO, the CFO, and like a whole gaggle of other people, and they're like, we don't know what to do. Our whole e-commerce site is shutting down. We're losing millions of dollars. And so I just go in there like, oh, we just moved something. Like there's this one little thing on the page that's not performing well. We find out an Azure function is doing it, and some bloke set it up on a consumption plan. I'm like, yep, that's it.
Yeah.
Make it a premium plan. He's like, oh, come on. That will never work, Mark. And like he did it. I'm like, just trust me. Change it to a premium plan. And literally, he changed it to a premium plan. Freaking worked. Problem went away.
Obviously, we have an exact, like, almost a mirror of what you're saying there. It's just, when we can group some stuff together, and it feels a bit more like we can make a justified case for using a premium plan, because that's what we're, and not to say John's very receptive to us making a case for all this kind of stuff. It's just, we have to make a case. We can't just let it be a new cost that gets added because we, the devs, decided it, if that makes sense. So I do want to use a premium plan and group some function apps together, and we may do that very soon, Tony, because that might be good to get NRS just grouped together like that. This
is the way. Like, you need to think of an app service plan as like a Kubernetes cluster, right?
Yeah.
Nobody sets up a Kubernetes cluster for every damn service that they deploy to it. Yeah. Right? So like you need the whole point of, and that's literally what an app service plan is. It's like literally just a container like orchestrator, right? So
like 100 function apps in it or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. You should absolutely have, network, database, app service plan. Like if you're doing functions, that's one of those low level sedimentary layers.
Yeah.
That you spin up cross region, like whatever regions you want to be in, you're going to have one of those things, just like a Kubernetes cluster, right?
Yeah, of course.
And you just load the crap into that thing.
Yeah. We're very prepared to. It's just we need to make the case. But it's good to hear it from you because now I can sell it much easier. And I do wanna get a premium plan in each region because we've got a big Azure function based work with mostly event grid triggers, but at least 2 or 3. No, actually, like 5 different HTTP triggers, which need to be high availability.
And so, the cool thing, I'll have to double check this. I might be lying, but I think the cool thing with the premium function plan is you can start with one instance, because unlike a traditional app service plan, where you need like 2 instances to get the availability target, the function plan is really just reserved capacity. It's not you get like a Kubernetes cluster, you get like 2 nodes or 3 nodes or 5 nodes. Yeah. That's the traditional app service plan. The premium function plan is reserved capacity. So it's like you have the high availability with 1.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We do want it. We'll just have to get on our knees a bit and ask very nicely.
It's like $150 a month, man. Come on, man.
That's $150 that it's a tough ask. But the thing is, we definitely, with the number of function apps we're making, there's definitely a case for it.
Yeah.
But again, due to subscription layouts and stuff, and again, I've just only come in, and so it's a bit, we say £100, but across 3 regions, and it's 300, and we can probably absorb that, but we want to move a bunch of old stuff over there as well, so it's less having to absorb it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's like 2 standard plans we could really move to 1 premium, and put a lot more apps into it.
You got to watch out. Are you using the standard plans with traditional web apps and stuff?
No. It's a function app.
Okay. All right.
So we're okay. And we will be doing some standard plans soon because we've got some web APIs coming up. Just to the point as well, all function apps we're doing now, we do have some .NET 6 in proc ones, but largely we're in .NET 7 isolated process. So I don't know if that makes any difference. They're all Linux VMs as well. So as cheap as it can be, we're in isolated process Linux plans, which is quite nice.
Devious idea. These APIs that are going to be hosted on a traditional app service plan.
Yeah.
Why don't you make your REST API using functions?
Could do. We've thought about it. I think the thing is we do want to do.
You just need a
when to use. It's hard to work out when to use a web API. Do we want to do, because we're isolated process? It means we have DI and configuration without plugging into the host process, so that's good. But we don't really need to host our own like web app. We could just use a function app, but we can review it. And that's up to Tony, to be honest.
The main reason I was thinking web app was for, you know, keeping it alive.
Yeah.
Because
but, I mean, if you're on a,
so essentially because we were on consumption plans for our functions.
Yeah. Not just that, it's function apps. I feel like one thing we were thinking about is we've got minimal APIs and MVC controller type stuff. And we were thinking this API might grow quite a bit and then have data sources on top of it. Processes could be longer running, so we're thinking maybe web API is the right way to go. And it's a bit easier to integration test with web app factory and stuff like that. Although I know you can use the web host factory to do some stuff. So we will have a think about it, but that's less of a Terraform issue and more other stuff. But yeah, I do appreciate that. I'm going to try and make a case for a premium plan.
So let me throw this idea out for integration testing. One of the nice things about functions, right?
Yeah.
Is they're so nimble and lightweight. Like there's not a lot to deploy. You can. What was that?
Should be.
Should be.
We've
Yeah.
got some legacy work which is not nimble or lightweight.
Yeah. Well, there. I'm not saying there's not going to be hard work to break up a legacy ASP.NET web API into like more granular functions. And by all means, like you do not need to have like every controller be its own function app. Like you can have a whole bunch of HTTP triggers in one go, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
But like, let me throw this out there because this is an approach that I've used. You said integration testing. And this is very common in the Kubernetes space too, right? But because of the ephemeral nature of like being able to spin up pods, tear them down, spin them up, tag them, that sort of thing. With Terraform, like you could have an integration pipeline that will run quickly because we're not laying down virtual machines or crap like that. We're literally just deploying function apps, which are kind of like containers in a sense.
Yeah.
You have a Terraform pipeline that provisions an end-to-end environment with a bunch of rando, like integration test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You run an integration test script and hits all of those API endpoints. Think Postman, but in an automated fashion,
of course.
right?
Yeah.
And then you tear that sucker down, So I think there's definitely ways, where you could use Azure functions, and some of these detractors in your mind could be overcome by using some of the capabilities that Azure Functions has. So I definitely encourage you to really think hard about whether you want to stick with the old school MVC web API or break it up into Azure Functions. So
we do. We generally want to move away from traditional web API into the more function based, and we have kind of started that journey.
It's hard to know always when is the right time to swap. I've tried to work it out, tried to make some, we've got durable functions going, we've got...
Oh, God. No.
They're not too bad. I don't mind them, but we'll see if they...
Run away, my friend.
And we've got a lot of time service, which eventually we want to turn into timer triggers as function apps, so that's an obvious case. But maybe when we get to more data, it kind of feels like we want sometimes maybe a bigger, not MVC, but the controller layout and when you're doing auth and stuff like that. But I'm not sure yet. We have a lot to learn in that regard about when to use which. It's not always obvious, and sometimes it feels like just use function apps, and sometimes it feels like make a bigger thing.
Yeah.
I've just started a new web API, and it's literally got one action in it at the moment. There will be more, but I wrote it as a web API because I knew it was going to get hefty, and it felt like, there'd be scope for somebody to make a function that did way too much stuff, or sucked in too much data, and you wouldn't be thinking about it while you were developing it.
Well,
whereas if you wrote as an API, you'd be in that, your head would be in that space line.
Yeah.
In terms of caching, things like that.
I think the way I think about like Azure Functions, the HTTP trigger is essentially like one method on your controller, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you can't create hefty, Azure Functions projects. It's just the the organizational structure of your code is going to be a little different. It's going to be a little different, and but all the things are still there. Like you still have to think about, what the routes are going to be, what the request and what the response is going to be. You can still use, and this is one of the things that I always do when I set up Azure Functions. I get rid of the static methods, and I set up dependency injection, right? Yeah. So you can still do all that wizardry, and do things in a very organized fashion. It doesn't have to be like fly by the seat of your pants. I think a lot of functions get a bad name because people think like, oh, I'm just gonna copy pasta like code into a web browser and like that's my code. But like I've always used Azure Functions as compiled DLLs, and I deploy the package.
State's the big thing for me. So if you're talking about you've got a set of functions that need to load n entries out the customer database and then do several things with them.
Yeah.
So if you either go for a web API and you put the state in the startup basically, or you have to reread that state every time you go into the function, or you have to write a function to give you the state.
Yeah, you can do function chaining is the usual way, and you can do that through Event Grid or through Logic, and there's lots of ways you can do it. I think I don't know.
So it's a fight though, isn't it, compared to writing a web API?
I'd have to look at the exact scenario, but I don't see any difference. I've never encountered a problem. Like state, you can set up a caching provider. Use caching. You have access to the app pool. All that stuff is still in. Functions is literally just running in .NET. It's an abstraction layer on top of the ASP.NET framework, right?
Yeah, we definitely can. But I think there's a thing as well about you're saying about onboarding. A lot of our devs are much more familiar with .NET Framework MVC, which is similar to .NET Core MVC, and especially setting up stuff like authorization is more familiar to us. So it's one of the things where whenever I'm writing functions, I feel like I'm pushed to make things small, light, which is great, but at the same time I do feel a less familiarity, and so when it's kind of interesting getting to this one thing.
So that's where you should use like an API gateway, right? Yeah. Because one of the pain points with I feel you, Anthony, right? Because one of the things, like when you build like a monolithic, web API, it's like, okay, I've got my middleware, right? I feel good. Like I can configure the middleware and I know where it's at. But like what a pattern with modern, web API development is you extract the middleware, and that's, the API gateway. And so you build an API gateway, it does the authentication, the authorization, and passes that on to the functions. So when you're writing your functions, it actually becomes simpler. You don't have to think about the middleware, right?
I think what I'd say about this is it's because from a business point of view, our basic idea is we want to transition to the cloud. and we want to, we want to strangle the monolith, strangle the big dirty monolith, move to the cloud, and get ourselves back on top of the tech curve. Like our MVC app is still not done at 4.7.2. So I agree with everything you're saying, but I think it might be too much in one go. So it might be easier to transition to web APIs, keep it familiar, and then when we've got to there, then transition to bring it to functions. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to get anything done otherwise, to be honest.
Yeah.
Which is,
so I think the combination of the two, depending on the use case.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've gone for. Our first call is usually, can we do this in a function app? And usually the answer is yes. So it's kind of hard, as I say, the main thing on this is it's hard to know when to swap. And usually the thing is, if we're doing a pure HTTP with no triggers, maybe, but, then you're paying the always up time on that. So there's so much to think about when it comes to
it should be use case dependent.
Yeah.
Just conscious of time, Mark. We've got 2 minutes, so
yeah. For a Terraform talk, we spent a lot of time talking about Azure Functions.
I wonder if I could fit something in 2 minutes.
Tom, it has to be 2 minutes.
Mark,
it has to be 2.
Have you used anything like Spacelift or Terraform Cloud, and would you recommend using something like that for management?
I have flirted with Terraform Cloud. I have not used Spacelift. My challenge with those kind of systems, and I'm full disclosure, I don't know a lot about Spacelift, right? I know, like my boy Anton has been pushing Spacelift. He gets a lot of sponsorship from Spacelift and whatnot. But like Terraform Cloud, I was actually talking with a friend of mine that works at HashiCorp about this, because like HashiCorp, like they're kind of like, how do we sell this, right? And I was like, I don't know, because the thing about Terraform, and from my experience, is Terraform is just one piece or one tool within a tool chain. And so, yes, there are things like state management, and yes, there are things like, config that need to be managed, but like, I can't just like have yet another tool and like jam it into my pipeline tool when I've got other things like, Packer or Kubernetes or Ansible that I need to kind of coalesce into a working system. And so Terraform Cloud, I think it's like some of the rose-colored glasses that, and I'm going to get in trouble with this probably, but some of the rose-colored glasses that it wears is like you're only using Terraform, right? And it's only trying to solve for Terraform. But you need to run CLI. You need to run Bash. Like there's lots of shims and polyfill within a pipeline, in the real world that you're going to have to drop into some, weird tool, and it's not all going to be Terraform. So I don't see I could be convinced, maybe HashiCorp will like sponsor some of my YouTube videos and I'll just magically change my mind. But like, I'm not super convinced that Terraform Cloud gives enough value on top of like a pipelining tool. Don't care what pipelining tool, Azure DevOps, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever. Like the thing about those pipelining tools is it's like a Swiss Army knife. It can do anything, right?
Yeah.
And you'll see on my YouTube channel, I roll my own Terraform pipelines all the time, right?
Yeah.
And my Azure DevOps modules, basically I automated a fully working Terraform pipeline on Azure DevOps. My most recent video, literally just run Terraform apply, creates a repo, loads a sets up a dev and a prod pipeline, sets up Terraform state, sets up everything, right? And it I run the pipeline, it provisions a resource group. Okay, big deal. It's not a complex environment, but you know as well as anybody, once you get everything working end to end, you can start adding crap to that resource group and keep running Terraform apply. So to me, like, I don't see a tremendous value in Terraform Cloud. I would stick with a pipelining tool of choice, and not add complexity to your tool chain. That's me.
I might have to look at your videos for the DevOps pipelines then, because the YAML pipelines drive me a bit insane sometimes.
So my pipeline module actually uses a YAML pipeline,
Yeah.
but my YAML pipeline I always use Bash, and I think I talk about I'll be talking about why I do that. That was a mailbag episode coming up, but I always use Bash. Just it's portable, and I know what's going on, you know. So if you go get I published these modules to the Terraform registry, so you can go download them. You know, punch in I think you need a PAT token to talk to Azure DevOps.
Sure. Yeah.
Punch in your subscription information, and it will set up a working repo that will provision crap to your Azure subscription. You just need
Cool.
a storage account and a service principal, you know, and
Yeah.
don't check those things into code, by the way. But
We don't. We've got a lot more key vaults than we used to now that we're on Terraform. Everywhere, which is very nice.
So, well, now to draw it to a close because we could go on and absorb your time for the next 3 hours.
I'm sure you could. It was a lot of fun. Before we go, is everybody cool? I have been recording. I don't have to publish it. Is everybody cool? Like if I publish this chat, I thought it was really good. We had some good back and forth. Is everybody cool with that?
Yeah.
Any objections? No. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Thank you so much. Very, very cool. Nice to meet you all. Good conversations. Azure Functions, I think you guys can tell, have a special place in my heart. So, I'll definitely be talking more about how to build Azure Functions pipelines and some of the integrations, you know, testing stuff that we discussed today. That's all on my roadmap for my channel.
Great.
So, check it out.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Cheers.
No.
See you guys.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, that's it. Spent about an hour talking Azure Functions, Terraform, and Azure DevOps. A little bit of Terra grunt. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I work very hard trying to earn your subscription, so if you'd consider subscribing, it would really help the channel a lot, and I'd appreciate it. Anyways, that's it from me, the Azure Terraformer, signing off.